I seem to be getting a lot more comments and questions like this regarding discard and feeding your sourdough starters. And I just wanted to address a little bit more about the feeding and the discarding of the sourdough starter, because I do understand that it can come across as a little bit confusing, but once you get your head around it, it completely makes sense. So this person is saying that if you remove 50 grams every day and then add 100 grams, which is 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour, then surely your starter will grow. Yes, absolutely, 100%. But that's not what I've been saying in the videos. But the fact that I'm getting so many comments like this, I think it's just something to kind of readdress and go back over. So when we're feeding a starter, we're feeding it with a 1:1:1 ratio. And when you use ratios being a 1:1:1 or a 1:2:2 or a 1:3:3, whatever the one is, you can have that as anything. So let's call 1 50 grams. So then this one here needs to be 50 grams and that one needs to be 50 grams if we're doing a 1:1:1. But if we're doing a 1:2:2, if that is 50 grams, then that would be 100 and that would be 100. But in the early days, to get your head around making a starter and when you're first making sourdough bread, think about it in the simplest way possible, which is a 1:1:1. So when we want to discard and feed our starter, we don't want to take out 50 grams, we want to leave 50 grams. Because if we had 150 and we want to feed it with a minimum of 1:1:1, so when you're feeding a starter, irrelevant of whatever you do, never ever feed it with less than 1:1:1. So if you had 150 grams and you removed 50, you are left with 100. So you shouldn't be feeding it with 50 and 50, because if you use a 1:1:1 ratio, you have 100, so you then need to feed it with 100 and 100. Now I have done some other videos on what happens if you don't discard, and I think within 7 days you have enough starter to make 126 loaves of bread. So let's not be doing that, because that's just a silly way of doing it. But going back to this question, it's not about what you take out of the jar, it's about what you leave behind in the jar. So if you want to make lots of loaves of bread, you need to make more starter, so you need to leave more behind, which is absolutely fine and makes perfect sense. If you want to make 10 loaves of bread and you need 150 grams of starter per loaf of bread, and then you also want to leave 50 grams at the end so that you're able to then feed it and keep your starter going, of course you're then going to need to leave behind more starter. But of course it depends on whether or not you want to do a 1:1:1 ratio, or whether or not you want to do a 1:2 or even a 1:3. Because of course if you wanted to make 10 loaves of bread, then you would split that into 3, or you would split it into 1 and then 3 and 3 and 3, or 2 and 2. So it really just depends on what ratio you want to feed. But what you leave in your jar should never, ever, ever be more than what you started with. So I think that's where a lot of people are getting confused when they're making sourdough starters, because they're taking out the amount rather than leaving the amount. So when we feed, I'm saying we leave 50 grams in the jar and then feed it with 50 and 50. So then tomorrow we would have 150. So then we take out enough to leave 50. Now, a few people might say, well, why not just say take out 100? Well, the reason why I'm not telling you what to take out is because you might have more than 150, because you might have baked 3 loaves of bread yesterday and you might only have 60 grams in your jar. So if I said take out 100, you'd be like, how can I take out 100? Because I've only got 60 grams in my jar. If I take out 100, I've got minus 40, which is why I say, well, actually in that instance, you wouldn't take out 100, you would take out 10. But then somebody else might say, well, I got confused with my starter, or I was going to make some bread and I've got 200 grams of starter, but I never made the bread in the end because I ran out of time, as that's happened to me. So what do I do tomorrow? If I take out 100 grams, that means if I've got 200, then I'm left with 100. But then, and so that's why I'm saying we don't take, it's not about what we're taking out, it's about what we're leaving behind. Now that was a really, really long way of me explaining it. And I've probably overcomplicated it yet again, but ultimately it's what we leave in the jar, not what we take out of the jar. Any questions, drop them below and I'll see if I can help you.